Hi everyone, this is Bill Sanders and this is WatchArtSci. Today what I want to talk about is how watchmaking became one of the major focus of Switzerland and how today we look at Switzerland and Swiss-made watches as the very best in the world. Well, to get started, we're going to take a look at, of all things, a massacre. and we'll start with a wedding. There was a queen who was a Catholic queen named Catherine de Medici. And Catherine had a daughter named Margot. And at the time, there was some conflict between the Catholics and the Protestants. The French Protestants were called by the pejorative term at the time as Huguenots. So when we talk about the Catholics and the Huguenots, we're really talking about Protestants and Catholics. Okay, so they had a big wedding, and they invited all of the Huguenots. Now, the Huguenots were like, we're not going to go to Paris because, it's like, right, it was a very Catholic city at the time. This is back in 1572. Anyway, okay, so they go to the wedding. They have a big wedding party. And several days after the wedding, the Huguenots, nobility, there were a lot of them who had come to the wedding, they started murdering them. They started killing them. Everybody had to put their guns away, or they didn't have guns. They had mainly swords and knives and so forth, and hatchets, and they had to put them away for the wedding. And so the killing started. Now, they started in Paris, and they went off to the rest of France, and by the time the thing was finished, there were between 5,000 and 30,000 Huguenots who had been murdered. Well, this was known as the St. Bartholomew's Massacre, and to understand it, what was going on. Now, this led to a lot of people leaving France who were Huguenots, and they ended up in Geneva. Now, we're going to take a look at this, and we're going to start with what the world looked like back during that time, and especially in terms of Christianity. There were two splits in Christianity. There was the Eastern Orthodox, and then there was what we'll call the Roman Catholic. Actually, there was Eastern and Western Roman empires, but that's another story. Okay, the Church of Rome, at least in Western Europe and Northern Europe, had been part of the Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic Church. And in about, I think it was 1517, a priest named Martin Luther came along, or more of a scholar, I guess, and he said, the church is taking a wrong path. Now, the church was the Catholic Church, and the big complaint that he had was that they were selling what were called indulgences. Now, this is basically the forgiveness of all sins, and the church was making lots of money selling indulgences. And so he thought about it, and he came up with what were called 95 theses that he published. And upon publication of this led to a big furor. Essentially what he said the Catholic hierarchy is not what we should be listening to. We should pay attention to the Bible, and we'll read the Bible, and instead of giving any kind of recognition of the Pope and the papal hierarchy, which was called the cardinals and the bishopry. All right, well, this didn't go down well, obviously, with the Catholic Church, but it was a period that was called the Reformation. And if we look at the Reformation, we can see that it was pretty popular in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, Germany, that part of the world. Also, Scotland, too. Scotland turned out to be the Calvinists. And also in Switzerland. Now, where you had massacres, you had torture, you had terrible things that people did to each other back then. And so they went to, the Huguenots especially went to Switzerland. Now, in Switzerland, In particular, in Geneva at the time was a guy named Jean Calvin. We know him as John Calvin, and Calvinism was a branch of the new Protestantism. And what Calvin preached was a type of austerity, not austerity, but I guess it would be austerity. That we shouldn't be we shouldn't be playing around with material things. He was anti-materialistic, which is sort of interesting because Calvin got credit for the driving force behind capitalism. But so what he did is that he pretty much banned the wearing and creating of jewelry in Geneva. Well, here you had all these goldsmiths, and so what are they going to do? So they said, look, watches are okay. You can make watches because after all, watches are sort of nose to the grindstone kind of instruments. We can see what we're doing with our day. And so they started making watches. Now, at the same time, there were a lot of Huguenots who were fleeing to that part of Switzerland, especially around Geneva. And so they had the kind of talents and skills, and people wanted watches back then for different kinds of things. It was used in navigation a lot, and all kinds of different things. The military was starting to use them as well. Okay, so they got into watchmaking, and they got pretty good at it. The jewelry aspect of it didn't do so well, but the rest of it did. So this was sort of the essence of it. To give you an example, there was a Huguenot Catholic battle at Besançon. And Besançon was just about 100 miles north of Geneva. And when the Huguenots lost, the ones who stuck around Besançon, they were executed. They were tortured and executed. So they took off and they went to Geneva. And just one of the many examples of saying, "Hey, we're out of here." If we look at the Huguenot symbol and their flag, we see two things that are interesting. One is the Maltese cross, and the other is what is called the fleur de lis. In another video on Patek Philippe, I talked about the Calatrava cross, and the Calatrava cross is made up of 4 fleur de lis. And Vacheron Constantine's logo is made up of a Maltese cross. So here you have both symbols very predominant in the Huguenot flag. So it's at least it's my hunch that these had an influence on the kinds of things that they saw as good symbols for their watches. All right. Later on, the French started making watches again. Well, I shouldn't say again. They've been making them all along. And one of the ironies is that Besançon became one of the major places where L'Oreal watches were made. And one of the reasons they were making them there for the chronographs was because they had an observatory which could verify and certify the accuracy. And like I said, it was only 100 miles, well, actually about 95 miles from Geneva. And so instead of COSC, today, some of the French watches use the Besançon Observatory for their verification. Okay, well, that's sort of that's a very oversimplified version of the Reformation, but it'll give you an idea of what led the Swiss to make watches and to make a lot of them and make very good ones. Okay, that's all for today. This is Bill Sanders. Love to hear your comments. Again, I'm not a religious person, so don't suggest that I am, and I don't want to get into a religious argument with anyone. Everyone's religion's their own, and that's their own business. But if you have any comments about the impact of religion into Switzerland and the impact of Calvinism on it. I'd be really interested in hearing you. There's a lot I think we can all learn from different sources. But anyhow, okay, that's all for now. Leave a comment, subscribe if you like, and until next time, this is Bill Sanders.